As a car enthusiast, you might be surprised to hear that this is my favourite SUV. I know, shocking, right? Of course, the obvious question is, why? Well, of course, I'll get into the nitty-gritty details later on in the video, but in summary, this is the SUV that isn't trying to be something it's not, and it does other things that actually matter much better than its competitors. Let's get into it, shall we? My name's Tom, and you're watching Paragon Cars. Let's go. Before we start, please like, subscribe and hit the bell if you'd like us to keep bringing you this content. Now, you might have noticed that this is the SQ5, meaning the usual 2-litre diesel is now a rorty 3-litre petrol that fizzes, pops and bangs, and instead of the usual comfort suspension, you have adaptive air suspension. Let's talk more about the engine though, as for only 3 years could you get a petrol-powered SQ5. All other models now use a 3-litre diesel, which is a shame as this V6 is the nippiest of the bunch. With 354 brake horsepower and 500 Nm of torque, it's good for 0 to 60 in just 5 seconds. But let's see how this family cruiser does on the 30 to 70 sprint. Well, it's certainly not slow. We managed a very respectable time of 4.68 seconds. That's certainly quick enough for everyday use. But did you notice the Audi S4 sitting a fair bit further up the leaderboard? That car uses exactly the same engine and gearbox, which really puts it into perspective how much weight and aerodynamics can affect a car's performance. Enough about the performance though, let's take a look at the inside, because it's got to be one of the best interiors to date. Material quality is always good in Audis, but it's the layout and design that really sets the SQ5 apart from the competition. They've managed to make all the usually mundane areas of an interior interesting. Take the HVAC controls for example. Instead of a bog standard knob, though there's nothing wrong with one of them, in this Audi you get a knurled display and capacitive buttons for extra ease of use. Even the ambient lighting, which is usually quite obnoxious in some cars, is very discreetly tucked away under the carbon fibre strip along the dash. Then there's the well-renowned virtual cockpit, and for me this is the perfect design. Later Audis have now moved to a funkier rev counter design, when really there was just no need to. Rev counter in the centre, map on the left and other info on the right. Why does it need to be any different? The same well thought out design can be found in the centre console. A clicky wheel for navigating and 8 shortcut buttons for pretty much any function you could think of. Literally my only negative for this interior is the cup holders. They're perfect in terms of size, but their placement just makes them a tad awkward to get to. Moving to the rear, the space is good for anyone under 6'2". I'm 5'11", and as you can see, I've got a comfortable amount of room above and below. There's then your own climate control and an armrest with some very neat fold-away cup holders. Moving further back, the boot space is great. Not only does it offer a lot of room at 550 litres, it's almost a perfectly square shape, making it very easy to move things around. Of course you can fold the seats down, and that'll give you an extra 1,000 litres, and that means this SUV can happily swallow a fridge no problem. Okay, tour over, let's see why this is an SUV you might actually want to buy. Back on some very wet British roads. So what is an Audi SQ5 like? Well, Audi seem to have this thing of just making every car very soft and lovely to drive, and it kind of makes every single car they make feel the same. One thing that you do notice in this Audi SQ5 though is the suspension is quite a lot softer in comfort mode than you'd expect. That's because we're riding on the adaptive air suspension. And it means going around town, I mean, it almost feels like we're driving a Mercedes S-Class. It's that smooth. The steering is just, oh, it's so nice and light in this car. I mean, you can literally steer it with your pinky finger. It's that easy. And although Audi tend to make their S-cars quite subdued, there is a nice grumble coming from this V6. Of course, it's the same one that they use in the Audi S5 and S4. Sadly, in 2020 they moved back to diesel because of emissions. even though diesel was bad. Now it's good. Bit of a weird one, that. So this model with a petrol engine was only made for 3 years, and this is the only SQ5 that has a petrol engine, because in 2014 with the previous model, those were diesels as well. And it's a shame, because this V6 has a really nice power band to it, and I'm sure when we get on a B road later it will make a huge difference on how it drives. But just driving around town now, this has the typical absolutely silent ride quality that all premium Audis have. And it does actually mean you have to watch the speedo quite closely, because it feels like you're going a lot slower than you actually are. But it's even the smaller things like the control weights for the indicator, and everything just has this really satisfying clickiness to it. Like, you just press buttons and they just have this really tactile feel to them. And that's where Audi have always been really good. It's almost like they spend half their budget on just making really nice knurled switches for their cars. In terms of parking, the SQ5 you can get a auto park feature. I don't think this one has it. No, it doesn't. And you can get a 360 camera as well, but this car just has a reverse camera and parking sensors. And to be honest, that's all you really need. It's still got lines telling you where you're going to go, and you've got parking sensors all round that never seem to get fooled if they get water on them. And they are very accurate as well. But manoeuvring this thing is actually surprisingly easy. Its footprint is only marginally bigger than an A4, and obviously that's because it's built on the same platform. And it feels like it has the same steering rack. Although the turning circle does actually feel very slightly tighter. I don't know if it is or not. But, I mean, it almost feels like a London taxi, this thing. You can turn it around so quickly. Then coming out of junctions, this is using the ZF 8-speed gearbox. That combined with the lovely low-down grunt of this V6 turbo just means driving around town almost feels like you're driving an electric car. And that's the exact feeling you want from a car like this. It just needs to be easy in every single possible way. But what about fuel consumption? Because this is a petrol, obviously it's going to consume a bit more than diesel. But we're going to reset the trip now and see how well it does on the motorway. Because even though this is a sporty SUV, you don't want it to consume too much fuel, especially with the prices at the minute. Of course, before we get on the motorway, we've got to do our obligatory handling test. So we're going to put the car into dynamic. This will firm up that air suspension, put the gearbox in sports mode so it holds onto the gears for longer, and the shifts are very slightly crisper as well. Then you get the valves that open in the exhaust, and the steering sharpens up as well. Then if I put the gearbox into manual using the lever here, I can change gears myself if I want to. And it does sound pretty good, doesn't it? Only slightly annoying thing is you can't fully control the gearbox, so it will upshift for you. It's only in the RS cars that they allow you to do that. But you get a lovely burble on the upshift, and then if you come off between about 2 and 4,000 RPM, you get these little pops and bangs from the exhaust. It's very nice. Now though, we're going to go into efficiency. And this mode is actually customizable, sort of. And you can tick something called economy tips, and what this basically does is tell you how to drive the car. So if you're approaching a roundabout, it tells you to come off the throttle, and you know, other things like it'll tell you not to rev the engine. Back on our favourite motorway then. And this is where this Audi SQ5 absolutely shines. There's almost no road noise, no wind noise, because you get acoustic glazing as standard. And it is just such a therapeutic car to drive. The steering is still nice and light, yet it's direct at the same time. Plenty of communication, obviously not as good as a hydraulic rack, but this electric one is still pretty good. Seating position is actually pretty good. They've improved it over the previous model. Couldn't quite get as low as you'd liked, whereas this one, it's okay. It's still not quite low enough for me, but I can see where they're going with it. They want to give you that kind of commanding driving position, and it has worked. Then the seats, they are unbelievably comfortable in this car. They're actually different from the S4 and S5. they get slightly sportier, grabbier seats, whereas this is kind of, it's almost like the normal seat, but they've just made it look slightly prettier. On a long journey, these seats are probably some of the best you can sit in. The only thing I would say is I would like adjustable side bolsters, because if you are driving on a B road, even though this has stiffer suspension than a normal Q5, it does roll a little bit too much. Visibility is then very good. You have absolutely massive wing mirrors on this car, so there is no problem seeing in your blind spot. Then in terms of specifications that I'd get for this car, of course, because I like my music, the B&O sound system in this is ridiculous. It is so loud whilst maintaining its clarity. It is unbelievable. You get up to about half volume and that is loud enough for most people. But the thing is, when you crank it all the way up, the mids, the bass, the highs all remain completely clear. And you can actually change the level of surround sound, you can change how loud the subwoofer is. There is so much customization to be had with this system. And for me, it's just hands down the best system you can get in an SUV of this size at the moment. The only systems better than this, you're looking at a Mercedes S-Class with the Burmester system, or a 7 Series with Bowers and Wilkins. Then the next thing, obviously, it's going to be a panoramic roof. Every SUV needs one, because if you've got passengers in the back, they are going to get sick after a while, especially if they're kids, and that's what you buy an SUV for, isn't it? Then the last thing, for me, would actually be the extended ambient lighting package. It adds this really nice strip just above the carbon fibre, and at night it makes this car look like a spaceship. That's our motorway stint over, and we managed 32.8 miles per gallon. Of course, that figure's still going up, so over a long journey you'd get about 36 out of this car. And for an SUV with over 350 horsepower, that's pretty impressive, really. Certainly a lot better than the GLE 53 we reviewed a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, enough chit-chat, let's get on to some twisty roads. Right, let's see how this SQ5 handles our famous roundabout. Predictably, Audi kind of get a bit of understeer, not much else. Oh, there's a little bit of rotation there. You can get this with a sports diff. This particular car doesn't have it though. But powering out of corners, it pushes on quite a lot. It's designed with safety in mind, and it is wet, so it will understeer a little bit sooner. One thing you can do though is if you come off the gas and just tap the brake, you can get the car to really rotate around the corner. It kind of feels like a Porsche, but the wrong way around. All the weight's over the nose instead of the back. A bit of a weird experience. Got the pan roof just tilted open as well, so you can get a bit of noise. It does sound really nice and smooth, this V6. Wants you to drive it at 8/10. The chassis doesn't really want to be pushed too hard, and the engine wants you to sit in that really wide torque band. It's a nice car to get a move on in, is what I would say. Although if you want to, you can drive it at 12/10. And that's where Audis get a little bit weirder. If you drive it very hard, give it too much steering angle, it then decides it wants to rotate. It's interesting. Not quite as sporty as the Audi S4 though, but that's because we're just sitting higher up. Let's see how it handles a tighter B road. Still got it in dynamic, traction in sport, pan roof just ajar. And this is where Audis are really good. have enough feedback that you can go over bumps quickly. And this is where they really shine. You can be so precise with the car. You just know what it's going to do. Even though it's not quite as exciting, there is not a lot that'll keep up with one of these down a B road. And it really is like a backwards Porsche, this car. Mid-corner, you're just managing that understeer, and then you just power at that corner with that quattro system. And this is actually the proper quattro system. Smaller cars like the SQ5 and the S3 use a Haldex system, and that can't quite send as much power to the back as this can. This is a permanent 60-40 split, and it means you've just got that really predictable driving characteristic. And when you do get understeer, it's kind of counterintuitive, but you can turn more and the car will then send more power to the back. Bit of a weird sensation. But it means it's pretty much impossible to get into an accident in one of these. But even coming around the tighter stuff like this, you can just plant your foot mid-corner and you just know exactly what the car's going to do. That's where Mercedes and BMW can sometimes be a little bit sketchy. That's the thing, a lot of people say these cars aren't fun, but they're just different. Once you're used to them and you know how the car works in certain situations, you realise you just have to drive the car slightly differently. It's just a little bit harder to extract all that performance out of it. And as usual, it's either an 8/10ths car or a 12/10ths car. If you drive this car at 10/10ths, you're going to understeer into a tree. Okay, after all that, you might still be thinking, why is this my SUV of choice? It's clearly not that exciting, and yeah, you'd be right. But remember, this is an SUV. It's not a hot hatch, nor a sports car. It's not pretending to be something it's not. And I don't care what manufacturers say, an SUV is simply never going to be as good as its equivalent saloon. Don't get me wrong though, in some cases it can get very close, but you're talking about spending big money looking at cars like a Lamborghini Urus or a Cayenne GT. But even then, there's still a compromise, be it weight or balance. And that's why I really like the SQ5. It doesn't compromise on its comfort to give you an extra 5% more fun. Instead, it does the journeys you do 99% of the time, e.g. to work or a trip on the motorway, much better than its competitors, and even some cars with a much heftier price tag. Yet it's still what I'd call pleasant to drive. As always, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, give us a like, and why not subscribe? As not only can you see more videos like this one, you can also see everything we have for sale. Anyway, my name's Tom, and you've been watching Paragon Cars. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.